Carole Weinstein has been leading this conversation. This is her 5th week. After this, she's going into retirement. But but it's been an exciting and an informative 5 weeks. I've learned so much myself. You know, sometimes you think you know a lot, and then you meet someone like Carole, who really has an exhaustive knowledge of a subject matter. And I deeply appreciate these 5 weeks. And I'm sure, you know, many of us who are here tonight, but also people who've come and gone throughout this series of conversations, equally appreciate the knowledge and insight that you have brought to these communal forums. So with that said, Carole, also let me know when you want me to show the film, and I'll just share my screen and start that up for you. But thank you, Carole.
Well, thank you very much for everything you've just said, as well as partnering with all of us to make this happen. Actually, I would like to start with that. What we're going to see, I've only excerpted about 3 minutes worth of a talk that Jimmy did at Berkeley in 1974, if I have it right. I don't trust my memory, but I think it was then. It's actually a lengthy piece that you can watch later on YouTube if you want to, but it sets the stage for what we're going to talk about. So I'm always concerned in wanting to show things that provoke interest using the arts. So therefore, I thought it would be fun to start off with this very few moments, 3 minutes, 55 seconds worth of a dive into what we're going to discuss tonight. So go ahead.
I'd like to first of all, to comment on public education in America, especially with respect to Blacks, especially while on this university, the Black enrollment very low. I don't know if we can really respond to that or not, but just go ahead.
I'll do my best. I got you. I'll begin with the public school situation, which I know more about. And that's it's a very difficult question to answer too. Difficult answer because first of all, you can't begin to answer without feeling terribly shooting. And look, the truth is, it's very hard to talk about education in this country without talking about the whole society in which it mainly fails to occur. You can't, you hardly talk about schools, without talking about cities. And the cities are in the hands of financiers. The cities are in the hands of pirates, thugs. And our children, therefore, are victims of this, are victims of the principles according to which countries run. A country is not run according to the will of the citizens, I hope. All the good of its citizens, I know that. But for profit, for money, to make money. And education is $1 billion industry. And the least important part of the industry is child. I think this is criminal, but this is the way it works. Now, the public education in the city in which I grew up, is enough to break the heart, enough to make you want to kill. And when we try again, and try it over and over and over again, to educate our children ourselves, to be responsible for the teaching, the curriculum, for the books. We did that for 3 years in New York some years ago, and the experiment succeeded for 3 years. And because it succeeded, it was cracked, it was smashed by the Board of Education, the Teachers Union, and all of them. So that's what you're up against. Yeah, so you know what I'm talking about. That's what one's up against. As for enrollment at this college, let's face it, Black people in this country have a terrible time just getting through 24 hours a day. It's absolutely true, And education, it's hard to talk about education in a country in which literacy is adored. It's hard to talk about education in a country where people take seriously such a preacher as John Raynor and Ronald Reagan. You know, it's not, I really am not trying to be funny, it's true, you know. And for a Black person, to get education in this country, he's got to have a lot of guts, first of all. And to endure, I'm sorry, you know, I don't mean to be rude, but this institution is like many other institutions, and which means it's a racist institution. You know,
Amen.
There's no way around that. All American institutions are racist. And to get an education under those circumstances is a tremendous act of the will. And also you risk schizophrenia. But, I'm not saying this because I think Black people should not be educated, but I am saying that Black people very largely educate themselves. What you have to do is pick up the tools and with your own intention. You know, that's the trick.
Usually breast, it's not just a woman. Exactly. That. Look at how
I'm
much.
sorry, y'all. That wasn't me. That was a commercial.
Okay. Oh, thank you, Ron. Okay, well, unfortunately, the sound wasn't great on that, but later, when you have time, if you want, there is an hour-long conversation that is only a bit of. And the reason I brought it in to kick off, as I said earlier, was to stimulate your interest in seeing him again and hearing him actually echo what in fact he spoke to in the 1963 talk to teachers, because that's pretty much what he says in response to some questions at Berkeley in 1974. So what is important about that whole conversation in that time was, and excuse me for reading from my own notes because I don't trust my memory anymore anyway. So this way I make sure I cover the things I think that are important. And then of course, I'm going to get you very engaged, I hope, in the conversations. But in that particular clip and in the talk to teachers, which we'll get into in a bit, he poses some really critically important questions. And the main question is, what is the relationship of society to education? The futility of it, if it is not figured out, the cost of it, and the challenges to try to become educated, and especially in a public setting. He also poses for me, what does it mean to be educated? And what curriculum do we need, should we have, and for what purpose? How can that be, in fact, what he calls a paradox? How do systems of oppression and inequity promote education or not? More importantly, how does one get educated? We did talk during the last 4 weeks or 3 weeks about some of the challenges and issues that are very different in private and public education. And more importantly, what are we really trying to teach, educate, and do with people as they grow? How do we know that one is educated is, for me, the most important question. And does education ever stop? My answer is it shouldn't, but I think we need to ask it. I think we need to think about it and recognize that, in fact, no, it should not stop. And how do we make that happen? So what Jimmy said in that video, and what he has said in his writing, and what he said in the talk to teachers and many others, is to get an education under the current system. And remember, he's talking about this in 63, talking about it in 74, 79. And in fact, he was still talking about it until he left us. So basically, children become the victims of power and money instead of equitably being educated. They risk, I don't know if you heard him say the word, but he said it there, and he also says it in the talk later, schizophrenia. So in 1963, his urgent call to educators and administrators, he focused on the responsibility that educators have to address racism in America, but also to empower students to continue their fight for equity. For him, true education involves preparing our students to become active citizens and leaders in their democracy, striving for change where they see inequities and injustices. He showcased, most importantly, the irony of education, and especially in this country. And he called it a paradox because as one begins to become conscious, if you get educated, one begins to examine the society in which one is being educated. And he cited that as being probably the most important fear people have. So for him, the purpose of education is to create in a person the ability to look at the world for him or herself, to make his or her own decisions, to say to himself, this is Black or this is white or whatever, to decide whether there is a God in heaven or not, to ask questions of the universe and learn to live with those questions. It is the way that he saw we reach our own identity, and it's the way we become free. But he also said the paradox is because no society is really anxious to have that kind of person around. So too many people want a citizenry which will just obey rules. And if society does create those who obey, the society will perish. So he saw it as an obligation of anyone who thinks of himself or herself as responsible to examine society and try to change it and fight it at no matter what risk. And that was what kept him hopeful. And that is what he thinks keeps society hopeful. And he also believed it was the only way societies can change. So in the talk in '63, he emphasized educators should entrust that our students have the ability to become conscious citizens who are vocal about re-examining their society. This examination will lead them to consider the many issues that plague the nation. He also emphasized the disenfranchisement. And that's when he talks about his own experience in education, growing up in Harlem, and for that matter, many children who look like him and others who may look differently, but go through the same challenges and failures as a result. In other words, he's focused on honor. He's focused on looking at the society, including every structure, including churches, government, politicians, and the need for them to understand structure is operated for someone else's benefit, not for the child learning and not for the people who it should be, which is everyone. So basically, he said our children are watching history unfold before their eyes. So what are you teaching them? And that is why he said we're living through a dangerous time and everybody's watching us. And it's the responsibility of educators to approach education in a way that is not only inclusive, but is real. And it shouldn't be about just testing or performance, but to become holistic individuals who are cared for and protected. And that is really important because the kind of person he was very committed to being a loving person, which he got from his mother, and to being to caring for and giving to others as much as one takes, if not even more so in terms of giving. So he believed that in order for the country to become as good as it could be, we need to have that kind of approach. He also gives them a history lesson in this approach and in this address, in terms of how the country was settled and how those who came over here to settle it did so. And it wasn't to support all people who were brought over against their will and to support other people's perspectives only. So he was very committed to focusing on social change through education and sees it as the educator's responsibility. And it's also focused on his values of freedom and democracy. He also talks about the responsibility morally and politically to change society if you think of yourself as an educated person. And he talks also about his personal experience, that he admits what he doesn't think he knew or can speak to, but he does see it on a larger scale. So he sees educators as being leaders, advocates who support students as they examine their society. He also mentions, and this is really important, America is not the world. And too often people think America is the world, people in this country in particular. And not only did he learn that by traveling the world, he made that observation very, very early and held it up as an arrogant attitude and also a default posture, if you will, in not progressing. So if he said, if America wants to be a leader and become a nation that is better, we have to find a way to use all this energy to do it differently. He also focused on how can we teach and educate using inquiry and continuous learning. And the reason why he did that is because he recognized that it's as important as not only giving people facts and throwing information at them, but how it is done and how it is put together, to use the creative and the practical input into the content and the methodologies that are used. So even though people are bound together often by a common oppression, if we want them to be loving beings, we have to focus on how we can be individually and communally free. He wanted to extend that kind of message to everybody. And he said, in Nobody Knows My Name, another important essay, in short, I had become an American. I had stepped into, this is when he left the country. I had become an American. I had stepped into and walked into what I inevitably had to do, the bottomless confusion, which is both public and private, of the American Republic. And another really important insight he had was the question of color in this country operates to hide greater questions of the self. In effect, it is used to hide the real issues, questions, and problems. Now, when I went and I revisited this essay, it reminded me of one of the most important educators foundationally in this country. And fortunately, I went to Teachers College later in my life to study and name what I was doing and how I could do it better in the doctoral program I engaged in. And one of the people who really made me understand why my approach was what it was and how I wanted it to be even more so was studying John Dewey. And I realized in revisiting his work recently And he lived from 1859 to 1952, right? So all of his pragmatism in education was focused on inquiry, critical reflection, and integrating it into the social experience. So all the concepts should be open to change, he said, and can lead learners to understand how to enable change and how to share meaning within community groups and others. He valued real life contexts as educational experiences. This is very relevant to what Raymond's going to try to do in this way of looking at curriculum in light of the James Baldwin Outdoor Learning Center as well. He valued all of this to help people not only think about real life and educational experiences in the relationship, but to reflect emotions, investigate habits. And learning happens more when people and interests are engaged and they discover and value differences focused on perceptions and explore a sense of wonder through social interaction. And Dewey was the most significant educational thinker of his era. He was a philosopher, he was a social reformer and educator. And he basically changed the fundamental nature of looking at how to educate and what does it mean and what does it mean for everyone involved in the process. And I thought it was ironic to me, the more I thought about it, how close they were in terms of the foundational approaches. And most importantly, Jimmy and Dewey put an emphasis on meaningful activity and learning and participation, unlike the old way of being authoritarian about it, rote learning, and so on. So curriculum should be relevant to children's lives. It should be relevant to adults' lives. And he saw that by doing this and developing practical life skills, which is what Raymond was raising in his comments earlier, are foundational. So to Dewey, the central imperative was every school must become an embryonic community life active with types of occupations that reflect the life of the larger society and that is permeated throughout. And when we introduce learning that way, within community and with service, and we provide effective means and instruments to do it, we'll have a better society. So let me stop there and ask for any of you who want to chime in, ask questions, comments, thoughts, etc. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just speak up.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with that. One thing though that I'd like to see if anybody has a comment on is I read Talk to Teachers, and you know, which I enjoyed, except for two little things. One, he means eager when he says anxious, and which is a pet peeve of mine. And two, having relatives who are schizophrenic, as we were talking about earlier, that's a disease, not a response to society. So I just want to get that off my chest. But when I read through this, I thought, well, I got to read this again. And then I started to read the beginning as somebody who has opposite values of my own. So I imagined that I was Betsy DeVos, you know, the former Secretary of Education or something. And
bad move.
You know, was well, what amazed me is how much it would empower Betsy. It's an attempt to correct so many generations of bad faith and cruelty right? Well, that could be Planned Parenthood that you're talking about, and it just, a number of things that the minds and hearts of young people must be prepared to go for broke. Well, they're wearing MAGA hats now. Okay, so it's like I saw this as something that I think I know what his agenda is, but I think the people who would completely disagree with my agenda would think that they know what his agenda is here. So it was just something that was going on in my mind. I don't know if anybody cares to comment or if they had the same thought, but it was something that really struck me about this.
Okay, thank you. Other thoughts, comments?
I had a comment. I'm sorry, go ahead, Glenn.
No, actually, why don't you go first, Ron?
Okay, I had it hit me when in the video, when Baldwin is, giving his answer, he seems to blame teachers as much as institutions. Did he have, teachers as far as union members? I'm sure he was like really referring to teachers as players in a union, which is about the power structure within education. And I'm wondering, did he have maybe not how he felt about unions, but how did he feel about the teacher's role in this whole dynamic? Well, not just education as an institution.
Okay, I'll quickly answer that, and if anyone wants to respond. He had incredible respect for teachers who he believed were honest, truth tellers, as Joanne often says, and she's right, about, I think, the kind of role that and spirit that he brought forth and everything he wrote and thought. So he saw teachers actually as guides, as truth tellers, and therefore he felt very strongly about their role in what they did and allowed him to do and learn from and give back and create community within where he went to school. But in his early years, he had an extraordinary teacher who was the woman who took him downtown to the theater, who introduced him to below Park Avenue where he lived, and opened up a world of possibility, which he always credited as being the reason why he also got so interested in writing plays. Why he also recognized how plays can be a vehicle for becoming the writer he wanted to become. He also saw the importance of how they could guide you and commit to, and you notice the phrase I used earlier, care for and protect. So he believed that teachers have every much a responsibility to care for and protect at the same time, which means that you want to protect the kind of institution in which students learn, but you also want to give forward new opportunities and new ways of opening doors that he would not otherwise have felt. So he highly respected and thought about teachers as being potentially role models for opening up his entire world of possibilities. And the daughter of that particular teacher, I'm actually in touch with, and she lives in the Midwest, and she often talks about what her family did in his life early on. Her name is Lynn Scott. So yeah, they mattered greatly. When it came to the union stuff, no, that was the teachers union in the years he went to school, was a whole different world, a whole different thing that happened that didn't start happening much later into the 60s in particular. And when Al Shanker got involved and they created the teachers union, and that's a whole mess I'm not even going to touch on because I have some real strong views on there. I'm not even going to go there now. But in general, the most important message I can give you from my understanding is he held him in the highest regard possible.
I'm just thinking of that Woody Allen movie
Which one?
where he holds, they're making a replica of the president and he holds the nose of somebody and he says, "Don't move, I got Albert Shanker in my."
Oh, yeah,
It's like, it's a comedy.
Yeah.
It's like
That
Woody
was one of
Allen.
my
Sleepers.
favorite ones because
Sleepers.
I hated him. And then sadly, I got to know his wife and that made me hate him even more.
Yeah.
Joanne has her hand up.
Yes, but I think Glenn was next, you know,
Oh,
that,
I'm sorry. Okay, go.
Thank you.
You're right. You're right.
Thank you, Joanne.
Mhm.
Actually,
Excuse my
just-
memory lapse. Let Glenn. Yes.
Yeah, no worries. On to speak on that, actually, Ron, I had a very close associated question. Baldwin says in the video, he says there was an experiment that was succeeding for 3 years and then it was squashed. I'm curious about if anybody knows what school that was or what he was talking about there. And the other thing I think about teachers is, you know, Baldwin, way ahead of his time, was a systems thinker. You know, he thought about systems. And that's why I think he meant by, you know, maybe dissing the unions, was that the union is still, like he says, all American institutions are racist. So I think everything working inside those institutions,
Right.
you know, consciously or not, are working in a racist kind of system, right? So I think that's, yeah.
I'm pretty sure I know the answer to your question, though. What he was talking about was more than likely the experience I had with the teachers union in Harlem during the infamous teachers strike, when Roddy McDowell wanted to have community control in the Ocean Hill Brownsville district of Brooklyn. It is a famous and it is infamous as well strike that happened to happen when I became a high school teacher at Benjamin Franklin High School. And I worked through the strike with 3/4 of the staff because the union tried to bust the efforts of the Ocean Hill Brownsville movement to create community control of schools. So that's what he was talking about. Go ahead, Joanne.
Thank you. My comments, you know, relates to something that was in a talk to teachers, and also that you had mentioned, Carole, by more specific words, when you talked about democracy and freedom.
Mhm.
And while he doesn't use it in his talk, you know, with this and with the creative process, it implies that teachers have to be free within themselves and, you know, and able to enforce their own aspect of democracy to be able to teach effectively. So my question is that, you know, in terms of what you said about John Dewey and the impact that he had on teachers and the learning process during that time, what influence, past and present, does teachers, colleges, teacher education have on creating the kind of teachers that Baldwin is talking about, to give them that kind of freedom or even that sense of being artists where they can validate their own processes as well as curriculum related to teaching?
Superb and important critical question. I have some answers, but anyone want to take that? Well, I'll tell you my experience at TC. I was in a different program than the one Ray was in and probably Glenn was in. I was in the doctoral program for adult learning. And the people I studied with were the 3 leaders of adult learning, Stephen Brookfield, Jack Mesereau, and Victoria Marsick in particular. And they couldn't be more the epitome of taking everything Dewey taught, and Maxine Greene. And the people who took everything that Dewey believed in and started in the early years, they lived it, did it, promoted it, and they tried desperately in the group that I was in those years to do exactly that, to tie it all. And Maxine Greene was quite well known for her commitment to, in fact, community education and pragmatism, and in wonderful, wonderful ways. And Ray can speak to that as well. I do think that they have made efforts. I think they do a certain amount of that. But about 4 years ago or 5 years ago, they had a whole couple of days dedicated to actually Jimmy's work, including this essay and some other pieces. And they had some very good conversations and events that I participated in that gave me some hope, you know, that I think there are still, some of them up there are in that mode, and I think they certainly will say they are, but how far they go with it, I'm not entirely sure. I got a mixed reaction during some of the curriculum discussions we would have, and I don't know. I think there's still a whole lot of educators who become educators because they have an attitude of, it's 20 years, I can be out of here, retire, and then do something else. You know what I mean? So I think there are some. I don't know. Does anyone else have some other?
Well, what level are you talking about? Because I was mostly an elementary school teacher, and for the last 30 years that I taught, I never saw any kind of curriculum. As an ESL teacher, I took it upon myself.
Right.
Unfortunately, the flavor of the month, you know, on February, I would try to research everything I could and, you know, introduce these African Americans to these kids, you know, the traffic light, even though they were very simple things. But I was even amazed at the tremendous contributions that African Americans made and continue to make. But also, you know, I haven't seen, my question was when Baldwin speaks of this in the 60s, 70s, 80s, what movement, you know, grew from this? I mean, now we have the critical thinking movement. So what, you know, what movement was created as a result of his, you know, powerful talk and his position and everything? Because I taught in the South Bronx. I didn't see anything. I mean, I had to sign up for an auditorium show, and this teacher every year she kept teaching Thanksgiving and only pilgrims. And I said, where are the Native Americans? Right. And I was just like, shut up, Anna, you don't talk about that. It was like, what? You know, so I don't, you know, I mean, I went to a school when I was in elementary school where we sang the, you know, lift every voice and all that beautifulness, and I didn't see it. I didn't see it throughout my teaching, and it, you know, it's unfortunate.
Incredibly important what you're raising, and a quick answer is it depends on the levels you work in the school system. It depends on who has control over the particular schools and the districts. And that was what he was trying to warn people about, is that what starts to happen is that power and political games take over, and the quality of what is taught, much less developing skills. And then if you go into measuring what is an educated person, what you learn or don't learn, is very much dependent on all of the systems that come out of whoever controls the schools. So since then, in particular, if anything, it has gotten even more so, very much determined by who runs the school districts, the areas, and so on, and the power of the unions. So what they may say in name, in theory, doesn't necessarily play out in practice. Does anyone else want to comment?
So
yeah, I want to share my idea about education, especially school system. As I told, I love young children because, you know, I really appreciate their wisdom and, you know, their wonder, curiosity on everything. Whereas when they go to school, you know, school system kind of grade them. They grade on their test result, but it's kind of like grading the student herself or himself. And especially in my country, it's kind of really terrible. Like if you are not good at school, you are kind of treated as like outcast. You are failure already, even at elementary school level. So which is really, terrible thing to happen to all the wonderful children. And personally, I think as long as there's a test or grading system, school can be a success. And I think homeschooling is on a kind of has possibility to, improve that kind of a system, I think.
Lavon?
Then
Thank
Ray.
you. Oh,
Go ahead, Luvon.
okay. So I wondered, did we talk yet about Baldwin saying to be a part of the school system he was describing, you have to be schizophrenic? Did we talk about that?
We did, but why don't we hear your perspective on it?
Oh, rats. I wanted to hear what everybody else said.
Oh. Well,
That's okay.
Being recorded. There's a recording. of it.
Recorded. Yeah, I'll hear it. I'll hear it. I mean, of course, I want to co-sign on that. Certainly, I'm a schizophrenic, so yeah.
Well, he was also addressing very early on what actually a friend of mine wrote a book on double bind several years back. There's a colleague of mine when I was doing my consulting work over the years with the professional firms and so on. And the whole double consciousness or triple or quadruple consciousness one has to deal with in just trying to get through a day, and that includes the oppression at every level, whether it be racial, whether it be because of economic status, whether it be what district you live in, therefore what schools you have to choose from or must go to, and everything else. So absolutely, he addresses that in one way or another in almost everything that he's written, if you just look deeper into it. And that is exactly his overall point, is that if you want to develop free thinking individuals, not only do you have to be committed to the entire population and enable it to happen through allowing free thinking curriculum and creative curriculum and so on, you have to do it in a free and open way and not be afraid of educating people, because they may turn around and know more than you know, and therefore not enable you to stay the way you think you want to be. Because he's always said that everything that's wrong with society is not about me, it's about you. And it's perception.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you said that at the very end, Carol, because I was thinking more of being, of having it's a schizophrenic experience, because so many parts of self have to be unspoken, unseen, hidden. Okay. And that would speak, I don't just mean sexual orientation. I mean, any variety of identities. So if I'm in a quote, audience or gathering of quote, educated people, there's a certain kind of presentation and articulation that's expected. And any other forms of presentation or articulation, which is part of my identity that I bring to that gathering, I can't express it.
Right.
So that's what I was thinking of about schizophrenia and, in education or any social institution. Yeah.
But he talks a lot about lying to yourself with these myths, and that, censored or kind of repressed or oppressed history is a part of this creation of these cultural myths that you have to live under to validate yourself in a certain way, to make yourself seem like more than you are, or to make someone else seem less than they are. And that, his thing was not accepting the labels and the things that people in society was saying about him, him as a Black man, because they were doing that for their own purposes around what, was a dominant white supremacist culture was trying to present, rather than trying to really articulate who he was and who they really thought he was. And that's what I guess, you know, when asking the question about teachers' education and all of that, you either have to be a very strong individual to kind of resist some of that and actually teach, or you have to be a very, you know, repressed individual. And for some of the news stories that you see now with these teachers talking about being censored or being afraid of committing a felony for having a certain book in class and everything, how can they operate? They can't, they're not really teaching because their freedom has been taken away to be teachers, or I think Baldwin would even say artists, because that's in a sense what they are.
Right. Absolutely. But, you know, to your point, Lavani, he absolutely uses the word identity in this essay. And he uses it in so many ways and so many places, because that is the essence of what he was trying to communicate. You can't figure out your own identity, whatever it is, whatever mix you want it to be, unless you are a free thinking person and you know how to dig in and find it and figure it out and become it officially, as opposed to what boxes people put you in. Ray?
Yeah. Well, I want to trail back and hopefully make it back to where we are in this conversation, but just reflecting on Teachers College for me, most of the teachers who went there were not the kind of teachers who were waiting for their pension checks or their retirement. You know, these were, I think for the most part, just because of the maybe the expense or whatever, you know, I felt that there was some moving against the grain in that regard. I don't know how, you know, maybe Glenn would have other perspectives on it. But I do know that, you know, around the time that I left there, which was about 2009 or so, there was a kind of data-driven philosophies of education that were, you know, starting to take hold. And there was a whole standards, you know, move to standardized curriculums, and and you know, many of the professors, I think, were caught up in you know, trying to appease the, you know, city contracts that were also being given out at that time, with their own, you know, more Deweyan instincts, I would say. But you know, I'm a product of thinking outside the box, certainly, and that was very much from, you know, studying with Maxine Greene and you know, thinking about freedom and how it exists. And I wanted to point out to, I was the one who recommended the creative process essay just because it's one of my favorites, and I do, Joanne, you know, the connection between the artist and the teacher, I think, is you know, a kind of especially profound in that, you know, what kind of education, like are the artists are they the teachers, or are they the students that we want, you know, them to be? You know, is the creative process, is it just for artists, or is this the kind of the standard by which, you know, our society's education should run? Like, we need students who can appreciate those artists, or else be artists themselves, at least, you know. But I also wanted to, and I don't think that came out right, but I'm trying. I wanted to reflect too on, you know, just because of this 5-week book talk and having read Another Country, the beautiful, encouraging ending of, you know, there is a real kind of, at the end of the creative process, it's so uplifting to me. You know, it's a challenge for all of us, but it also goes back to Another Country and what we had discussed earlier. He says, societies, I'm just reading the last couple sentences. For an artist, the record of that journey is most clearly revealed in the personalities of the people the journey produced. Societies never know it, but the war of an artist with his society is a lover's war. And I'm sure the same can be said about teaching, right?
Mhm.
And he does at his best what lovers do, which is to reveal the beloved to himself, and with that revelation make freedom real.
Yep.
Which, you know, that personal connection, you know, the actual witnessing of the other, you know, who can't see themselves, is really one of the themes that we pointed out in Another Country. And so it also, I guess, just to end this, the consistency of his ethic, you know, is throughout all his writing, which I really appreciate.
Thank you, Ray. Anyone else want to add? To
Just
add?
really-
Oh, go ahead.
Just really quickly, I guess, I think the problem is, Ray and Joanne, to be honest, is like TC might produce those types of teachers, but there's nowhere for them to go. There's no schools, there's no systems that allow that to flourish, especially, you know, in numbers. So like my hope is with this, you know, when we're able to start new schools, and, you know, my mentor, Bill Stroud, has started a bunch in New York, and that's the goal of the whole school, right? Is to hopefully create an environment, you know, that allows the artist, rather than, I think what most schools do is create technicians, you know, because of standardized testing, because of just the status quo, you know, because of curriculum, like all that is, it really stifles, I think, the artist and teachers. And that's why we're, I think, in a lot of ways seeing a mass exodus from the profession right now. Is it's like becoming overbearing for folks. So.
But the thing is, you know, in the same way you're creating the programs, you have, you know, Christine has her program, Kids for Coltrane, the system may not recognize or provide the freedom, but artists really create, first of all, for themselves and for their love of society. They're going to find a way to get their art out there somewhere, you know, even if it's in, you know, a little neighborhood gallery or, you know, online or something of that sort. And I think Baldwin here is when he talks about with the teacher, you know, doing this almost by any means necessary.
Yeah.
Go for broke. Find that way to go for broke to teach and to get it out there. Because again, it doesn't say that the society at large, or that, you know, whatever the ruling groups are going to understand or appreciate it. Look how long it's taken a lot of people to appreciate him.
Right.
So can I jump in? It's Christine.
Yeah,
mentioned Kids for Coltrane. If you'll bear with me very briefly, if I can give you an overview of what Kids for Coltrane means, and then I'll also briefly tell you how the system in the last years before I retired treated me. And I think it speaks to what Ray is saying, and Carole and Joanne and Glenn as well. So briefly, the Kids for Coltrane program is a curriculum that focuses on jazz to teach children about American history, equality, character education, and the arts. By doing this, children become invested in literacy, creativity, compassion, curiosity, and courage. It is a program that celebrates the individual while also working in collaboration with others. After the creation of the program, growing from my work as an educator in the New York public schools, I am now dedicated to bringing this important curriculum to communities throughout the world. As Joanne says, go for broke. It doesn't say that in my writing, but I'm adding that, Joanne. Standing on the shoulders of John Coltrane's life, music, and spirit, we will continue to help children blossom to be a force for good. The work of John Coltrane is vital to American democracy if we are to look at who we are as a people and all our hardships and joys. And so it's just like an overview of what I did. The work was amazing. It was terrific. It was celebrated by Nat Hentoff, by the parents, and so on and so forth, and initially by administration. But I think Ray mentioned around 2009, the system changed. And once that started to happen, the pushback against me was incredible. I was harassed. And I was confused because the work was extraordinary. And so eventually I did retire early because of the harassment I was receiving. So I feel I'm not giving up. as Joanne says, go for broke, as Baldwin would say, we just have to keep continuing. And so I retired early to try to figure out how to use my artful way of teaching and how to empower others and empower myself. But I had to leave the system to try to help change the system. I'm also a fan of the work of Peter Senge in systems thinking, and I've been to Harvard for 5 professional developments to learn directly from Howard Gardner and so on. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just been heartbreaking. And I'm more of a question, I guess. Let's see how I could pose this. This system that we have in public education, is it truly meant to educate all children? And what I've learned myself, if I could answer it, and I would love to hear Ray's opinion. I have learned firsthand that there's racism, there's classism, there's ignorance, and it often comes from the administrators that are put in place. And the change has to happen from high up if we're really going to change the system, because I don't think that the system is in place to educate all children. And that's why it keeps failing. So I was wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Mike, can I add one more thing to, Christine, to, what she's saying here? She started Kids for Coltrane with elementary school kids, and now a lot of those kids who are in college and are older, they're still coming back to her, as well as their parents, and talking about what the experience continues to do for them and did for them.
That's
in their
true,
development
Joanne.
information.
Thank you for that, that's true.
Right.
Simone, we have you, Simone Williams.
Hi, Ron. It's nice to see you. Hi, everyone. I have been listening to this conversation, really taking in a lot of what you all have been sharing. Thank you so much. I really like this question about, is the system really meant to educate our children? Because I think that question, sorry for my background, that question makes me ask the question of, what does education even mean, and what education means, but also what education means to people. And just to give a quick background, I actually just left my teaching position mid-year, which is something I never would have thought I would have done. And I understand why many people would judge me for that, but I simply could not perpetuate a system that I think was basically setting our students up for failure. Because as someone who was a product of the Department of Education, to transition into a role where I was working in the Department of Education, I was just completely shocked daily at the way education has kind of shifted from when I was a student to now being a teacher. One of the things that I was very upset or kind of had a lot of pushback towards was this idea of like culturally responsive teaching, because I don't think people understand what cultural responsive teaching is. And I think that in the system that I was working in, culturally responsive looked like not holding accountability and not giving students real life examples of what happens when they don't follow the rules, when they don't conduct themselves in a manner that they're supposed to conduct themselves in school. And I think that that was really like getting in the way of us being able to do our jobs, because punishment and discipline and all of these like new concepts that people are now trying to redefine is just really taking education from a space of learning and community, which is what I think was my education was centered on, to a space of a structure that many people are still trying to figure out what it really means for them. And before coming into the DOE, I was working at a private school, and to go from that space where education meant agency, education meant creativity, education meant flow. Education meant if you have a lesson planned for the day and halfway through the lesson, let's say you plan to read an essay and you plan to have students answer questions afterwards. If we're in the middle of reading the essay and students have a lot of questions and we need to pause and look at a video, we have the room to do that, because that's what education is. It's flow, it's reading the room, it's honoring what the students are asking, it's giving them the opportunity to take control of what they want to learn. To go from that to a place where the do now is 5 minutes, you gotta do it in 5 minutes, you gotta move on to the mini lesson, you gotta leave room for the homework, you just all this like rigidity. It made me explode. And so I just rambled, but to answer your question, my question to your question is, what does education even mean? But then also, what does education mean to people, especially in this day and age? And I just had to leave, completely step away from the system, kind of figure out what is my role as an educator, what it is that I want to contribute to this space, what I think education even means. And this conversation is making me target and reflect on a lot of my own beliefs and biases and et cetera and et cetera. So thank you for asking that question and for holding the space for me to get that off my chest.
Bravo.
Thank you for sharing all of that. And I have no doubt you will come out where you want to be, because you're going through the struggle to figure it out and figure out where you can best contribute. And everything that you shared is even making me realize how tragically a mess that we still are in, which is very upsetting for me, to put it mildly, because I started my efforts to get there in 1965. So Simone, you'll be fine wherever you decide to go. And yeah, go make a difference in any way that you can, but don't ever give up what you just said and believe in, because that is the nature of what Jimmy's trying to share with us here. And more importantly, most of us who have had the experience of figuring out how to become educated understand what it means. And that is the question that I started with, isn't it? What does it mean to be educated? And it depends on who you ask, and it depends on what system, and it depends on who's engaged in the conversation and the perception of what that means, and everything that comes you to that. And it is tragically still a big mess. So moving on, since I know time here is short, but to add more just briefly to the creative process, which Ray brought up earlier and commented on to a certain degree, I think some of the most important things to get out of the creative process essay, and I can't urge you enough to reread these and rethink them and make your own meanings out of them on your own time. But one of the things that it highlights for me is it was his opportunity to share his perception of why, quote, the artist, if you will. And again, that's a loaded word, depends on, how you define it. But for him, the artist was the person he became. He was the person there to disturb the peace, to use a quote of his at St. John the Divine in the Poet's Corner. Artists are here to disturb the peace. So for him, an artist is someone who knows how to get into the depths of being alone. An artist is someone who knows how to go into the wilderness, and this is a word he used a lot, to see his own face, to see his own being, to know who is your brother, who is your enemy, who is not. All we can do is learn to live with all the forces that perpetually menace a precarious security. I mean, he wrote that. We cannot know that unless we're willing to tell the truth about ourselves. We cannot become the best we can become unless we reconcile what the forces and who we want to be, and as was mentioned earlier, figure out our own identity. The healthiest nation is one which has the least necessity to distrust or ostracize these people. The dangers of being an American artist are not greater than those of being an artist anywhere in the world, but they are very, and I'm quoting him, but they are very particular. These dangers are produced by our history. They rest on the fact that in order to conquer this continent, this particular aloneness is the aloneness in which one discovers that life is tragic and therefore unutterably beautiful. So if you want a free society and a beautiful society, you got to be able to look at both. And that is this prohibition, which is typical of a lot of emergent nations. So he's looking at America as still an emergent nation. So if you can't tell yourself the truth about the past, guess what? You're trapped in it, and it immobilizes you, and you do not discover yourself. So to be educated is to discover yourself, is to define who you are. On the other hand, he believed we were the strongest nation, or we had the potential to be the strongest nation. Societies never know exactly what they need to know, but the war of an artist with his society, and this is what Raymond referenced earlier, is a lover's war. And he does it as his best, what lovers do, to reveal the beloved to himself and to make freedom real. So because we're really tight on time, I want to throw in just a couple of comments about Black English. When I was revisiting and preparing for this, I remembered, of course, how incredible this essay is and how important it was. And going back to many of you bringing up the issues around the systems and the power structures that don't enable real education to happen, and how whatever we do, and that includes whatever curriculum you want to develop in the JBOLC, et cetera, has to recognize. So the essay was written, interestingly, in 1979, and it's called and Ray, I think you're sending this around to all of you, so you can just
Sure.
download a copy. Yeah. If Black English isn't the language, then tell me what it is. Tell me what is. And he wrote it in France. So this beginning of this is so important. The argument concerning the use or the status or the reality of Black English is rooted in American history, has absolutely nothing to do with the question the argument supposes itself to be posing. The argument has nothing to do with language itself, but with the role, R-O-L-E, the role of language. Language reveals the speaker. Language also, far more dubiously, is meant to define the other. And in this case, the other is refusing to be defined by a language that has never been able to recognize him. People evolve a language in order to describe and thus control their circumstances, or in order not to be submerged by a reality that they cannot articulate. And if they cannot articulate it, they are submerged. Anna, did you want to make a comment? Oh, I thought you did.
No, I'm just trying to
Take it
open
in.
what Ron sent. Somebody sent.
Oh.
I put a link to the if Black English isn't a language in the chat, so you can download it.
Okay.
Or open it up.
Okay. So what joins all languages and all men is the necessity to confront life in order not inconceivably to outwit death. The price for this is the acceptance and achievement of one's temporal identity. So that, for example, thought, it is not taught in the schools, and this has the potential of becoming a political issue. You realize how important that is? Thought is not taught in schools. What is education? Okay. Much of the tension all over the place, he feels, is due to everybody not allowing languages to keep evolving and to be accepted and respected, and instead to say, only speak American English, for example. Language is also, he says, a political instrument. It's means and a proof of power. It is most vivid and a crucial key to identify identity, connect one with or divorce one from, And it's true in every part of the world. And his sense of humor was quite extraordinary. And I love when he wrote this. Now, I do not know what white Americans would sound like if there had never been any Black people in the United States, but they would not sound the way they sound. Jazz, for example, is a very specific sexual term, as in jazz me, baby. But white people purified it into the jazz age. Saka to me, which means roughly the same thing, has been adopted by Nathaniel Hawthorne's descendants with no qualms or hesitations at all, along with Let It All Hang Out and Right On. Beat to his socks was once the Blacks' most total and despairing image of poverty, was transformed into a thing called the Beat Generation, which phenomenon was largely composed of uptight middle-class white people imitating poverty, trying to get down, to get with it, doing their thing, doing their despairing best to be funky, which we, the Blacks, never dreamed of doing. We were funky, baby, like funk was going out of style. I say that the present skirmish is rooted in American history. Black English is the creation of the Black diaspora. Blacks came to the US chained to each other, but from different tribes. They couldn't speak the same languages. And he goes on, brilliantly for more, but most importantly, the brutal truth is that the bulk of white people in America never had any interest in educating Black people, except as this could serve white purposes. It is not the Black child's language that is in question. It is not his language that is despised. It is his experience. A child cannot be taught by anyone who despises him, and a child cannot afford to be fooled. A child cannot be taught by anyone whose demand essentially is that the child repudiate his experience and all that gives him sustenance and enter a limbo in which he will no longer be Black and in which he knows he can never become white. Black people have lost too many Black children that way. After all, finally, in a country with standards so untrustworthy, a country that makes heroes of so many criminal mediocrities, a country unable to face why so many are in prison, on the needle, et cetera, they have concluded they have nothing whatever to learn from the people of a country that has managed to learn so little. Somewhere else, Jimmy said, for a Black American, the Statue of Liberty is simply a very bitter joke. So to get equitable education for most, we need to reimagine the design, the delivery, the access, and the assessment of whether we truly are an equitable society with equitable opportunities for all. So I hope from these three pieces, you have some more thoughts, more thinking about how it can affect what you do, what you want to do next, whatever curriculum you want to develop, and whatever else. So can I hear from anyone else who wants to contribute some closing thoughts? And I'd love to hear as many as we can hear from.
Yeah, I can go first. I want to just share my idea about the school system is has too much focus on intellect, developing intellect, and not emotional or social, or so it's kind of a broken system. And what's the purpose? I wonder what's the purpose of education of this system. It's not about raising happy, wholesome human beings. It's more about smart person who can make a lot of money and famous. Yeah, that's my idea.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Other
I have a question about, for all of the people who are creating curriculums, as to, I'm asking why you're trying to create a curriculum only in a sense when language has been co-opted politically by so many systems for their own purposes, and you have all of these education boards that have to validate and approve curriculum before they really allow them to get into school systems that you've already said aren't really interested in educating children. Anyway, why isn't in doing this you're using some other term or thinking about another framework for how it will be either presented or marketed so that it would be more accessible to more people besides teachers, say?
Right?
Yeah.
You go
I
ahead,
mean,
Ray.
that's a huge question, and thank you. For instance, in Carole, I shared with her a draft of, kind of an introductory chapter or something to the curriculum that we're writing. And yes, one of the things that I pointed out was the kind of reinvestment in the verb form of the word curriculum, which is curere, which is, running a course. And it's much more open to, direct experience, because curriculums are made as you run the course, as you kind of explore, and as Christine, I think, put it so well, that approach to learning where you focus on the student learning and you read the class, but yeah, I guess we're just at the beginning. And really, curriculum does not have to be the word that we use to sum up. We have an alternative learning space that is not necessarily going to be subjected to review by the system. In that we are a nonprofit organization, and we want to educate people about the space where we live. The immediate community where we reside and the nature that's a part of that. So, but it's a great, I had certainly objections to the way curriculum is used. It's totally predictable. It's like, why even do it? The answers before you ask the question. There's no creativity necessarily. There is measurable performance, and that seems to be the objective, is to get students to perform so that you can measure it.
And I also want to, sorry, I'm talking a lot, but want to add what Ray said. Like the wonderful thing about our initiation of outdoor learning is by people, like your uncle, your neighbors, your grandma, everybody come together and share what they know. And, I hope it's based on curiosity. When you are not curious, you cannot really learn. So.
But before I know the time is coming, but I do want to, again, remind us, this is just a launch. So we would like to stay in touch with you, and Ron, that's possible, right? To just kind of continue to
that would be great.
To message with you as we, I know that Carole, and I want to, and some of us want to meet in the near future to discuss this further. So, please look for further announcements of what we're doing and what we're trying to achieve. But certainly we are trying to create an alternative space where, and based on our experience, the garden is a great place where things happen. People are attracted to it. We don't have to invite anybody. And that goes for, the nature there too, the pollinators and the birds, it's just creating an inviting space, and that, is kind of the context of our learning experiment here. And thus far, it's brought us to where we are now.
I just want to say we've come a long way from Dick and Jane to maybe the likes of Faith Ringgold. So, we have we have taken some steps ahead.
Any other thoughts, responses, ideas?
I thought Richard, Ray, Richard, trying to say something earlier? No?
Oh, I probably was. I'm always going to say something, but, but no, in trying to find a different word for curriculum or a different maybe meaning, I was just thinking that that's a good idea as long as it's not being disguised. You know, there's so much PC attitude toward disguising something with a new word now that it loses its meaning, you know, as opposed to changing its meaning. And, you know, it's kind of like this group that we had tonight. You know, it like book club, you know, does not describe what we were just doing today, right? And yet this is under the umbrella of a book club, but it's not necessarily that the term book club is bad. It's just that it's not descriptive. It's not accurate of the last hour and a half. So if we could look for a word that is accurate for, you know, all of this, that would be fantastic, as opposed to just replacing it for replacing its sake. You know, even if the word were to assure educators or educate educators, you know, in opening up a new eye. Now, what that word is, I have no idea whatsoever right now, but it would take a lot of, I guess, brainstorming for all of us to figure out what are the elements. Now we'll name it.
Unless somebody has the word right now.
Well, I have one. I have two words, which you've seen me.
Well, of course.
Of course, at least two, right? To me, curriculum, no matter how many years, no matter how many, God knows, things, and I've done of development of curriculum and teaching people how to do it. I basically define curriculum as the content and the methods that are used to learn. And I do it very intentionally, very simply, because I totally believe language matters. And I also know that a lot of people on the other end of that receiving that message have no clue about what we're talking about. Content is simply what you're learning. Method is how you're learning it. And so I make it very simple, and it usually gets across so we can then move into, so what do we really need to know? What could we know about taking a walk in the park? And how do we do it? Through the creative experiential methodologies that we use, and what we do then with our brains in response to the experience. So it's a mixture of content, experience, and method, which for me are always the key words that I use.
And see,
And
to
Carole,
what
just
Carole
because this
is saying, the song was talking about making it more accessible to, you know, grandparents or whatever.
Exactly.
If you're not a teacher, you know, people hear curriculum, they think only teachers can manage that, and that's only for teachers. But the kind of thing that we've been talking about, and that, you know, Baldwin was saying, was that almost everybody in society besides the teachers and, you know, the experts at it, need to teach. When he talked about, you know, what the Third Reich was doing to teach the Nazi regime, those weren't teachers alone teaching, you know, those young people. That was, you know, people who had been drafted into that ideology, who were just disciples of passing it on, whoever they were, whether they were military people, political people, or whomever else. And I think that accessibility becomes very important in making sure the language invites the people that you want into the discussion.
Right, absolutely, yep.
That's great. And also, Carole, with your list of words, I was just thinking, you made the word context come up, because outdoor learning is based a lot on context. It's not based necessarily on the page of a book or a description in a book or a description by a teacher even. It's something that is in a place. it's in a community, right? And it's real time, you know. So I think context might be added to your list, which I thought was a good list, even though I made fun of you for knowing that you'd come up with it.
You can make fun of me. You know I don't really care if people make fun of me. My life trying to be provocative and people make fun of me all the time. Go right ahead.
So
I'm getting good at it from all our conversations. But.
I just want to start to wrap things up and thank both Carole Weinstein and Ray Pultinas. They were the drivers of this program. It would not have happened without those two. So thank you both for organizing it and keeping everything on track. I want to thank everybody who attended over these 5 weeks. I haven't sort of tallied how many people, but it was dozens of people who, maybe 100, definitely, who registered. And full transparency, though you registered through One Book, One Bronx, I've been sharing registrations with the James Baldwin Outdoor Learning Center so that they can keep in contact, with you also, because that's, we start here, but, hopefully 10 years from now, we will still be having these conversations on a regular basis, making progress towards the place where we really want to be. So don't think of this as 5 weeks and done. Think of your participation as ongoing. So I don't know if Ray wants to say any closing words.
Just to say thank you for a great conversation this evening, and I just, love you all for being here. Thank you.
Thank you. Carole, do you want to say any closing words?
Just thank you all for taking the time to participate, and I hope you'll keep educating yourselves and educating at least one other person, whoever that may be, however small or tall, and have a great rest of your experience with whatever we try to do together. And I'll be talking, I hope, to all of you, and you're all welcome to contact me anytime at any, and for any question, any time you want to talk about ideas. I have more time than I've ever thought I'd have in life at the moment. So I'm quite interested in getting engaged with anyone who wants to be engaged. So you can email me at my whole name, but it's Carole with an E. So Carole Weinstein at msn.com. And my mobile number is 212-464-7823. And you're welcome to stay in touch. And hopefully, maybe one of these days, we'll actually do something live again.
So
Yeah.
Speaking of live,
The center.
We hope, like we did last fall, we hope to partner with Ray, with James Baldwin Outdoor Learning Center again during the farmers market in their outdoor space. So we are looking forward to that. Again, hopefully the world will be closer to normal and you can, join us outside. But again, thanks to all of you who attended this evening, as well as over the past 5 weeks. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Carole.
Thank you, Ron.
Muchas gracias.
You're wonderful.
Another language.
Great evening. Great evening.
Thank